Well, it seems your boy did it. I finally got a PlayStation 5, and since it was a few months ago, it gave me enough time to play through a lot of games that were native to the PS5, or hell, even some games from back then that were updated for the PlayStation 5 to run at 60 FPS or higher frame rate. So yeah, in a lightning roundy type of sense, I actually want to review all these games very quickly because, I just want to tell people how good these games are and whether it's worth getting a PS5 for or not. Which brings us to the actual launch title of this entire console. Now, there's not much to actually say about Astro's Playroom other than it's a pretty solid 3D platformer, I guess, but other than that, there's not really much special to it. Yeah, it does show off the DualSense features, but personally I couldn't care less. DualSense controller is essentially just a controller with glorified vibration, except it makes sounds and has a bit of resistance in the triggers. It's similar to the HD Rumble on Switch, but I'd say it's a little bit more advanced, but even then, someone like me doesn't really care that much about it. And other than the DualSense features, it has a bunch of PlayStation references that I think were neat, but definitely feel kind of shallow and surface level. Other than those things, there's not really much special about the game. I think it has some pretty decent platforming and some very, very great aesthetics. Overall, as a game, I'd give it like a 7 out of 10, even though in reality, it's really just existing as a tech demo, and I do think it's a pretty decent tech demo. However, unlike Wii Sports or something like that, it doesn't actually feel like a genuinely fun game on its own that you could just play, whatever. It kind of feels like the game that you just kind of install on your PS5 and have it for about 2 days, forget about it, and then delete it later. Well, in that case, if I want to rate it as a tech demo, I'd say it's not as good as something like Wii Sports, but it's definitely better than something like, I don't know, Rise, Son of Rome. Not really much to say about it. I like the references, I think the aesthetics are nice. And I do think the gameplay is pretty solid, but it's not really that much special beyond that. Oh, I know, I'm really just complaining about a tech demo, but in reality, a tech demo should still be a good game, even if its only existence is as a tech demo. Nintendo showed that with Wii Sports, so why can't this game do the same? Well, like I said before, as a game, it's pretty much a 7 out of 10, but if I wanted to rate it as a tech demo, I'd give it an 8. I'd say if you have a PS5 already, definitely play it once at least. But if you've had it for a while, or you want to get it, I would not really recommend this game that much. Alright, I think I'm gonna get dogged from both sides of the gaming community for saying any of this, but I think Miles Morales is actually a pretty solid game. Is it better than the original? In some areas, yeah. In other areas, it doesn't even improve, or it's not as good. Which, because I actually like this game more than a lot of people and less than some, I will get into the issues first. Now, one of my biggest issues is with the story. It's mainly that it's too short. It's not even that it's badly told, it's just not given enough time to breathe, and it just makes certain things feel rushed. Especially with the Tinker. I'm supposed to feel about these characters, but I would actually feel for these characters if the story gave me enough time to properly build them up. But since the game is like 5 hours long, it doesn't really give me the time at all. Still feel like there is love and heart in the story, but I feel like it is way too short and had to be met by a certain time quota for it to be properly shipped at the time it was going to be shipped. Which honestly sucks because I actually like the characters for the most part that aren't villains or anything. And I still think there's also a few nitpicky things that just aren't exactly coherent with Spider-Man. Like making all the villains his age kind of undermines him being an underdog, fighting crime, which said crime is usually caused or catalyzed by a bunch of adults. But I still feel like overall the story is decently written and has really great dialogue and pretty good moments, especially towards the end. But I still feel like it was a little bit too rushed. Another issue is, and this is a little bit more of a nitpick seemingly, but it will make more sense when I explain it. Miles Morales is pretty much 17 in this game, which I don't exactly like that choice that much. It definitely suits the story well, but I feel like for the character it kind of makes no sense because it makes his screw-ups feel more amateurish, which kind of sucks, especially when you're supposed to be rooting for this character to win and to overcome his challenges. Now, this doesn't happen too often in the game because it is pretty seldom, if I'm gonna be honest, but it's still there and kind of a bit of an issue. It won't bother many people because of its infrequency, but I still feel like his screw-ups are a bit more incoherent to his actual character. in context of the game. Now to move on to gameplay flaws, I will still say that the bosses are a bit underwhelming. I mean, they were already underwhelming in the original game. I feel especially more easy, especially when there's less bosses in this game. There's basically like 4 bosses, but really 3 because you fight Rhino twice, which you already fought him in the last game, so it's really just 2. It honestly sucks that these games don't really have the best boss fights, and really the best boss fight was the second Rhino one, considering that he just didn't feel like a normal enemy. But even then, that was still pretty easy and button mashy and a little bit underwhelming for my taste. It's more egregious by the fact that the combat in this game is so good, but they didn't properly utilize certain things about the combat. They're all just really easy. It's usually just dodge, web, hit, or some shit. Or dodge electric thing, or have them run into something. A lot of the strategies are just not very creative. Especially considering that the Spider-Man games are really known for having really good boss battles. This is just kind of underwhelming. Hell, even Amazing Spider-Man 2, the game, as shitty as it was, had some pretty decent boss battles. And they were pretty well executed sometimes. But a lot of the boss battles in these games are just kind of fine. There are a few decent ones, but you usually remember them more for their thematic importance rather than how good they were to fight. But yeah, criticism's out the way. Now time to praise the game, I guess. Like I said before, the combat in this game is really fucking good. A lot of people like to compare it to Arkham, which I never understood. I mean, yeah, you press square to attack, but that's it. Arkham has a counter dodge system, which for some weird reason, a lot of superhero games and even just licensed games in general are overly obsessed with this shit for no reason, which I find really hilarious. But even then, there's more of a dodge system rather than a countering system, which is why I never understood the Arkham comparison that much, outside of just pressing square to attack. Also, the swinging in this game is really, really good. I actually really think that while it doesn't have exactly the finesse that other Spider-Man games have, it's still the best overall in its physics, and I still think it does feel a little satisfying. Now, something I actually want for the sequel is for them to expand upon it by adding fall damage, especially when you do a trick wrong. Speaking of the trick system, I actually like the trick system a lot more in this game than I did in the last game. In the last game, it was kind of just like a mild speed boost, but in this game, it actually impacts what trick you actually do when you end up swinging, which I think is really sweet and very, very satisfying to pull off. Now, this also kind of ties into a positive and negative part of this game, which is the stealth. The stealth is kind of basic, which was my initial problem with it, but I'll admit that unlike the last game, it's a lot better because the stealth doesn't exactly railroad you into situations where you get caught and then you have to fight or anything like that. Like, you can just go back to being invisible, which you could argue makes the game a lot easier, but even then, it's still a pretty decent thing that the game kind of lets you do whatever it wants you to do, rather than railroading you into situations like the last game did. Also, thank fucking God that they actually got rid of those stupid ass Mary Jane and Human Miles missions. Now, there is a Human Miles mission, or 2, one's a flashback though, and the other is just like fixing a generator, which neither of them really require you to stealth around, but those really shitty human stealth missions in the last game were really, really tiresome. And I just did not like them because they were so easy. Thankfully, this game actually replaces with missions and puzzles that make more sense. But yeah, speaking of puzzles, you can't skip them this time, which I actually really, really like, because that actually encourages the player to be more strategic, and it also encourages the player to just play the goddamn thing in the first place, and let them overcome their own challenge. Even the story has its own a few peak moments, just a few highlights that I really liked. And I mean, I liked the character of Miles in this game, even if I don't think he should have been 17, but I still respect their take on this character. And, you know, even if there's a weak villain, at least in the very end, in the climax, it's overall the best part of the game. And it's really a highlight of the game with a bunch of visually cool looking stuff and also a lot of thematically enriching stuff. Which, yeah, leads me to my conclusion. I actually really like this game. I don't think it's really that amazing compared to the first game, but I still feel like it improves on the first game's shortcomings mostly. Now, yeah, people say it's glorified DLC, but I mean, yeah, sure, I guess. Maybe it was DLC and they just decided to stretch it because they wanted something for the console launch. But I still feel like it is still a worthy spin-off to the original game. If you actually want to play this game, I'd highly recommend getting the Ultimate Edition, especially if you didn't play the first game, because it includes the first game remastered, which is actually a really good deal, and that's what I did. Oh yeah, and also the first game remastered looks really fucking good. Like, yeah, it's the same game, but it's a fucking remaster. What do you expect? So overall, I'd probably give this game an 8.5 out of 10. I know that seems a little bit high for some people, but it's also too low for other people, but I really don't care. I don't care if I'm in the middle for this one. I like this game, just not as much as the original. It could have been longer, or it really just should have been DLC. I still think it's pretty solid. I'm sorry, but Destruction All-Stars fucking blows. It's so mediocre and so boring. It's really fun the first time around experimenting with these little cars, but then the gameplay loop just becomes so boring and tedious to the point where I just don't even want to play it. I still feel like the ideas are pretty cool, but unfortunately the game is really repetitive and boring and does not have enough replay value compared to a lot of other multiplayer games. This game was actually supposed to be a pretty big multiplayer game, but it turns out that a lot of Sony games that are like multiplayer are usually not the best, or they don't have that long of longevity. Overall, I think the game is pretty mediocre. I like the visuals and that's about it, but even then, it kind of copies aesthetics from other popular games, which kind of brings me to a nitpick I just have about games in general. Why does every fucking multiplayer game have to have these soft, arbitrarily cartoonish art styles, especially when they don't fit? I feel like Overwatch was the start of this, and then it just became the trend for every single fucking game to do this. I don't understand why this happens. Like, it's so generic now. But anyways, yeah, Destruction All-Stars gets like a 5 out of 10. There's like nothing to say about it. It really is a fat nothing. At least it's quote-unquote free with PlayStation Plus Premium. But like, who really gives a shit? It's Destruction All-Stars. You probably forgot about this game, and if you did hear of it, you still probably forgot about it. Or you probably just didn't know it exists. Definitely don't buy PS5 for this, it's not worth your time.
It doesn't matter now what happens, I will never give up the fight.
Yeah, I couldn't really get into Returnal. The playstyle was just not for me. I think it's a really solid game for what it's trying to be, but I'm not really that much into roguelikes other than fucking Hades. But yeah, it's pretty solid, it's alright, and visually looks really nice, and you can tell a lot of work was put into the game. But it's just not for me. I couldn't really get into it, I can't really give it a score, but I guess I'll give it like an 8 out of 10 for what it's trying to be. But in terms of personal preference, I don't really have a score for this one. Yeah, this is probably the shortest section, maybe, or maybe one of the shortest sections of this video. But yeah, Returnal definitely did not pique my interest as much compared to other games that were mentioned in this video. I'm really gonna get some shit from this one, am I? Both sides too, both the haters and the lovers of this game. I don't think by any means this is a bad game, I think it's a pretty solid game for kids. I just don't think it's exactly the most groundbreaking game. A lot of the game has like no strategy and you can just strafe and shoot around, kind of like the 2016 remake. But I feel like overall, it just lacks depth that the original games had. Even the original games and the ones that had strafing still felt like they were kind of a little bit strategic. You know, especially like tools of destruction. But I don't know, this game is just kind of whatever and who really cares? I do really think that visually it looks great, and like I am actually someone who likes the art style, even though some people say it's a little bit too poppy and CGI cartoonish, but I'm alright with its art style overall. I still think that the gameplay is probably like the second weakest aspect, and why the second weakest aspect? Well, because Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart has a story, and it's not exactly great. It's very overly sappy, and like, there isn't really much conflict, and even when there is conflict, it's usually resolved by an "I'm sorry" because the developers were too scared to have conflict in their game. You might scare the kitty winks, but I don't understand why that was the case, because kids actually like conflict, hilariously enough. I'm not saying do what DreamWorks does and like force conflict at the end of the movie, or the game in this case, but I still feel like there is no conflict. It's really just an emotional flatline. So it just makes every sentimental, emotional moment where they praise each other just come across as phony and fake. And I mean, overall, it's not the worst story in the world, or even a bad story. I just don't think it's a good Ratchet and Clank story, and it's really just like a mediocre emotional flatline for any game story ever. Overall, I don't know what score to give this game. I've been trying to hop around like 6, 7, and 8, so it'll be one of those out of 10. Like, it's definitely a fine game. I mean, I had a little fun with it, and I think the gameplay is solid, not like only on PlayStation 5 evolved type gameplay. And I do like that there's more movement options, even though the wall running is clearly automated, but you know, we won't talk about that. It's okay. Like, I liked the game enough, but I definitely don't like a lot of aspects of the game. Honestly, I feel like both sides for this game, whether it's really passionate or really vitriolic, are pretty much wrong, in my opinion at least. I feel like they're both kind of not invalid, but I don't exactly hold the same opinion. Like, some people just hate this game, and I definitely understand why, especially since it has a really generic open world. But I mean, the combat's pretty good, I think. I still think that the boss fights are actually really executed well, when a lot of PlayStation exclusives don't exactly have the greatest boss fights. Well, at least nowadays they don't. I still feel like it definitely has really shitty writing, and once again, a generic open world, but I still like the combat enough, I guess. I don't know, I'll give it like an 8 out of 10. It's definitely not gonna change your world or anything, but I personally like the game. I mean, I would like less of games like this because it's kind of generic and doesn't exactly grab the attention of people. But yeah, it's pretty serviceable and very solid. Oh yeah, speaking of grabbing attention, why the fuck does this series have to be so cursed and releasing a week before better games? First, it was the first game, releasing before Breath of the Wild, and now it's Forbidden West, releasing a week before Elden Ring, and it's just, like, I don't get it. It's like they fucked themselves over. They could have had the opportunity to release this some other time and not in fucking late February 2022. Because the game, as soon as like Elden Ring came out, it died. It's fucking dead. Holy shit. Now here's where it gets really good. I love Sifu. I love its combat. I love its visual style. I love the difficulty, even though they kind of nerfed that in an update, but who cares? I love this game. This game has really good combat. I mean, if you button mash, you can do that, but it usually gets you in the shittiest situations and you die a lot. Which, speaking of dying, this game has a pretty cool mechanic where if you die, you can rise, but depending on how many times you died, or on your death counter, you basically add the current age you are now when you died, and then when you come back, you will be that age. For example, if you die at 21, and you have 2 deaths, I guess, that are counted, which, by the way, deaths can be removed, but you don't get any younger. If you're 21 and you're gonna age by 2 years, you're gonna be 23, you know, it's basic math, it's simple shit. I actually like this game. Now, some are pulled off by its difficulty. I personally am okay with the difficulty. I think that overall it works for this type of game. Now, are some of the stuff, like, some of it, like, a little bit tedious? Maybe. But I still think that this is probably the best game overall, which is kind of sad, because, like, it's an indie game made by an indie studio, and exclusively on PlayStation and PC. But technically exclusively on PlayStation, because fucking Epic Game Source sucks. But anyways, point being, I don't know, I like this game. 9 out of 10, it's fucking amazing, please play it. And that's all for all the PlayStation 5 games that I played. Now, there are definitely some that I missed, like the Demon Souls remake, but that's a remake of a PS3 game, so who really gives a shit? Oh yeah, right. There's also future games coming along, and one is also a remake, and it's going to be The Last of Us 1 remake, which kind of makes no sense to exist, because the game isn't even 10 years old yet, but we'll just pretend it is and it'll be fine. They'll probably have Last of Us 2's combat mechanics, versus the originals, which were kind of stale in my opinion. But yeah, there's going to be future stuff, and with God of War Ragnarok especially on the way, and along with Marvel's Spider-Man 2, and hell, even the Wolverine game that might come out like after I fucking graduate high school, I still have some hope in the future of PlayStation. Not too much hope, of course, because it's kind of like killed their marketing, which made God of War Ragnarok so under-marketed for way too long. Like, as I'm recording this, you know, it's July 6th, and they've just announced the release date for the fucking game. But yeah, other than that, I'm actually pretty hopeful for what they've shown. Not too hopeful, of course, because this could easily be a disappointing mess, but I still expect decent things at the very least. And, I mean, hey, I use the PlayStation 5 to even play older games. Some boosted to 60 FPS, some that stay at 30, but run a lot better due to the PS5's power that helps it stay at a locked 30, versus, well, frame dropping all the time on Just Cause 3 or something like that. I think that overall, it's a pretty good generation so far. Now, should you buy a PS5 if you're a PS4 owner? It's just, I don't know. Personally, I didn't really have a PS4 for a while because, you know, I sold that shit a few years ago. Like, playing games at 30 FPS is a little bit boring after a while, and also very eye-straining and terrible. But yeah, I think that if you're a PS4 owner, I'd say maybe wait. But at the same time, if you care that much about frame rate and visual fidelity at the same time, I'd still say maybe get it. I mean, if it's available. The way I got mine is very obtuse and hard to explain. But no, I did not, like, someone sold it to me, so who cares? But yeah, I like the system. It's really cool. I mean, yeah, it's not as powerful as the Xbox Series X, but I still really like it. So yeah, the PS5 is pretty alright in my book.